Chuck Reynolds and Bob Tevis are standing by. Coming up, we're going to be chatting with Steve Hendrix, former senior diplomat in the Biden, Trump, and Obama administrations. But first, we got to check in with Bob and Chuck. Got your shoveling done, guys?
I did.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Good.
I was hoping Chuck was coming over here when he finished his, but he hasn't shown up yet. So
I set my timer for 20 minutes so I wouldn't be late coming back in, and I hustled it.
And you're
there's like a quarter inch.
Yeah.
So it wasn't
quarter inch.
I felt stupid. I should have probably just gotten my leaf blower out or something and just blown it off.
Well, at least your jaw's thawed out by now, right?
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin. I remember when like the snow was like 4 feet deep and the plows would come along and they'd create this huge amount of land and everything. Now, I think last year I had to shovel once and my neighbor came over once with a snowblower to help me out. But that was it, twice the entire year. So I kind of like this weather.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Except for the 18 below the other night. That was not a joy for me. Yeah, I think I told you guys I had 4 space heaters going so the pipes don't freeze up in my kitchen. So, yeah. On the other hand, the benefit of that is every time I turn on the cold water, hot water comes out immediately. So,
there you go.
I got that going for me.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Chuck, let's get to
the question.
Yes.
All right. So, gentlemen, today's guest made a career out of stepping into chaos and working to bring order. What is the time you found yourself in the midst of chaos, and how did you respond? So that's a question we're going to answer at the end of the show.
Okay.
And Steve, I'm not sure how you're going to answer that because it's going to be probably pretty much the whole show, but you can maybe save one really good story for the end.
All right.
And you can talk about that. All right, the introduction. I hope that your passports are current, guys, because we're about to go on a whirlwind tour with Steve Hendrix, whose job with the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, took him all over the globe. Steve was born and raised with his older sister in the Milwaukee area. His father was a reservist and civilian employee for the Air Force Reserve, while his mother taught at the Marquette and UW-Milwaukee Schools of Nursing. In high school, Steve played football and tennis, served on the student council, and applied himself in advanced academic classes. After high school, he attended Carroll College, which was what it was called at the time. It was not yet a university, where he pursued a double major in economics and Spanish while also pursuing his future wife, Julia, whom we recently had on the show not long ago. While attending Carroll, Steve was able to get into the International Scholar Exchange Program at the University of Nottingham, England. After graduating from Carroll, he went to UW-Madison to pursue degrees in law and Ibero-American studies, which further gave him an opportunity to study Spanish literature. Steve and Julia were married a week after he graduated from UW-Madison, and this is where we are just going to go through a quick review of Steve's career path, because otherwise you'd be listening to me read for the next 48 minutes. After getting married, they promptly moved to Washington, D.C., where Steve took a job as an international trade and finance attorney at the Export-Import Bank, handling over $1 billion in transactions annually. After a couple of years, they decided to move to Venezuela, where Steve worked for a law firm. They returned to D.C. after a couple of years in Venezuela, and Steve took a job with the University of Wisconsin Land Tenure Center, a job that Steve was able to do from D.C. In this role, he did a lot of work with USAID, and eventually they offered him a job in Guatemala, running justice sector programs focused on human rights, rule of law, and anti-corruption. That began Steve's long career as a diplomat. They returned to D.C., where Steve ran democracy programs for Latin America with USAID, and his next opportunity was a post in Nicaragua, an experience he captured in the book, The New Nicaragua, which is available at the Wapaka Public Library. They returned to D.C. again, and Steve was tapped to run the Meridia Initiative, a program focused on improving justice and combating narcotics, first in Mexico and then expanded to other Central American countries. Steve's next stop was Iraq, where he was charged with standing up 16 government departments, from energy to health to housing, for the U.S. government. From Iraq, Steve was asked to work in Paraguay to help a newly elected bishop after 60 years of one-party rule. From there, the USAID's biggest priority was Nigeria, where Steve was involved with programs focused on HIV, malaria, and internationally displaced populations. Steve then moved to Ghana, an assignment that was cut short by COVID. And so he returned to the United States, settling in Wisconsin to join Julia, who was then in seminary. Working remotely, he finished up his work in Ghana before taking on the position of advisor over South American programs and eventually managing director overseeing planning, performance, and systems for a budget of $54 billion with a B dollars at the State Department. That included programming for Ukraine, humanitarian assistance for Gaza, and a strategy for countering China. Steve ended his career with USAID in early 2024, and now, in addition to his consulting practice helping countries around the world, he is handling some criminal cases in Portage and Waupaca counties. Steve puts out the Global Minute, which are brief videos in which he describes things going on around the world in terms that the average person can understand and take about a minute or two. He has a website, stevehendrix.com, where you can learn more about Steve's extensive credentials, publications, and experiences. And that's more than enough to get us started. Steve, welcome to Curiouser.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Steve, welcome. This is Bob. I have a question because in your bio it says you grew up in the Milwaukee area. Is that right?
Absolutely.
You remember the Ernie von Schladehorn commercial?
Main Street in Menominee Falls.
God bless you. I asked that of everybody who lived in Milwaukee, and one guy said that, yeah, my grandfather was a mechanic there till the day he died. So.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my. A couple other questions. One, I guess I had one just for clarification for me. It makes a reference to degrees in law and Ibero-American Studies. Right. I had no idea what Ibero-American Studies referred to, and so I looked it up. And it looks like a group of colonial countries that speak Spanish and Portuguese as early colonies. Is that right?
Yeah, I think at the University of Wisconsin, they wanted to include all of Latin America, but also Spain and Portugal. And Spain and Portugal are Iberia, it's the Iberian Peninsula. And so if you look at Ibero-American, it's the Iberian Peninsula plus all of Latin America.
And somehow Andorra got included in there.
If you like.
I guess they probably like. I actually have a couple more questions I want to ask you, but some of those came out of an interview we did with your wife, so I'll just back off on those for about 5 or 10 minutes.
My number one role here in Waupaca is I'm the dependent spouse of the most important priest at the most important church on Main Street.
There you go.
That's not how she would have described it, but we picked up on it anyway.
I want to just kind of go back. When we interviewed, you said you're highly interested. Your topic in high school was social studies. What drew you to that? I mean, your career would have possibly predicted that, I suppose. But I mean, was that something like some kids are interested in playing a guitar, and you just were into social studies? And what do you recall as kind of bringing you to that point of being so interested in that as a subject matter?
The teachers at my high school, I think, were absolutely phenomenal in the social studies area. And they had great experiences, and we had a great curriculum, and I give a lot of credit to them. Also, I think my father, traveling around with the Air Force, gave me a sense of the world, and he did economics, and he said, you can go anywhere you want to university, except the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and you can study anything you want except economics, and you can work anywhere you want except the Peace Corps. So that was my career advice. And so I ended up doing economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and ended up with USAID. So
you were just walking the line on that advice. Wow.
It also says you spent time with the Wisconsin Land Tenure Center. So as I understand, that was advice to other countries on planning, investment, development, and it was around for like 40 years. So you were part of that. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah, it was part of the old Alliance
for Progress. It started out with President Kennedy and lasted until just a few years ago. Yeah, I think going back to the 1960s, there was a lot of discussion of land reform in Latin America, but it evolved over time to land use planning, land administration, land titling, environmental use and control, land markets. It became quite a broad set of issues, and it was a multidisciplinary center back in the University of Wisconsin in the 1960s. Interdisciplinary work really didn't exist anywhere in the United States. And so this was quite a novel experiment, how to put all of these disparate parts together in one single place.
So what's an example of a challenge or a problem that you'd be trying to solve in this sort of area of study or work with land development?
Yeah, well, going back in the 2014, 2015, the Colombian government was negotiating a peace accord with the FARC guerrillas. And they wanted to figure out how we can get a deal on land questions, land distribution, land rights. And I was brought in to advise President Santos of Colombia. I was not a peace negotiator. I was somebody advising the Colombian government on how they could negotiate with the FARC guerrillas. But I was advising President Santos on what the guerrillas were likely to ask for, what the policy considerations were. I didn't tell them what to do, but I said, look, if you want to do this, this is what they did in El Salvador. This is what worked. This is what didn't. This is what they did in Guatemala and Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Chile and Venezuela and all around the region. And here's, the benefits and the costs of this and what worked and what didn't, so that they could build on the lessons learned. And then I also advised the Santos administration, if the guerrillas ask for this, these are areas where you can come up with win-win scenarios that, or things you could counteroffer that would be beneficial to everyone. And they had a whole set of issues that they were trying to deal with at one time as part of the peace accords. And the very first accord that they were able to get done and launch the whole peace process was the area that I advised them on, the land tenure area.
So even after the department went away, or the land tenure department went away, there were still remnants of that advice coming from different areas or from guys like you who had experience?
Well, that was me when I was with USAID, based on my years of experience working at the tenure center.
So if you knew where to tap into it, you could still get the benefit of that.
Yeah, back when I worked at the Land Tenure Center, I advised on the peace process in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. We had the guerrillas in Peru, the Sendero Luminoso Shining Path guerrilla movement.
Oh, yeah.
Involved with trying to diffuse that, and which we successfully did. And so I got around in the hemisphere back in those days. And then since leaving the University of Wisconsin, I've been able to work on a global scale.
So you must have found your life in danger on an occasion, I'm guessing.
Yeah, a few times.
Anything you can talk about or you want to share?
Well, in Iraq one time, they sensitize us to, what to look out for and how to avoid danger. Our goal is to get away, to run as fast as we can.
That's good.
It's not to fight or anything like that. And one time I was in a car, armored car, and a security detail, and we went in for a high-level meeting with a government minister. And as we were leaving the compound, the guy sitting next to me said, that's the same lady that was sitting there when we came in. As we're sitting in the back seat, due to security, we're on microphones, right? So not only can the driver and security hear us, but the car ahead and the car behind can hear us. And as my colleague said this, one of the security members said, in their way, to immediately turn right. And we accelerated, and we were going to go left. And instead of going left, we went right and accelerated as fast as we could. And behind us, had we gone left, was a major explosion.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
So, these are the kind of stories we have.
Yeah.
I think, when, you go to the 4th of July party in Wapaka and they celebrate the veterans and the police officers and the firemen and with a good purpose. Just once I'd like to see, and the Foreign Service officer.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to Venezuela. So you're in Venezuela, then as you're there and as you're leaving, do you have any sense that things are collapsing?
Well, they've already collapsed. 20% of all Venezuelans have left the country.
No, I mean when you were there.
Oh, when we were there.
Yeah.
When I was there, when we first got there, it was, is this going to be a career thing or is this an experience? And I think we quickly understood, oh, this is going to be an experience. It's not going to be a lifetime move to Venezuela. We had some major security incidents, attempted coups and things like that took place at the time. Venezuela back then was the richest country in all of Latin America.
Right.
It was the longest standing democracy in Latin America. And now it's, if you look on wealth per capita, it's just ahead of Haiti. The place has collapsed.
Real quickly, in case you're just tuning in, folks, you're listening to Curious here. Our interview today with Steve Hendrix, former senior diplomat in the Biden, Trump, and Obama administration. Go ahead, Chuck.
We mentioned the Meridia Project, focus on justice combating narcotics. What kind of work does that entail? I mean, it looks good on paper. Those are nice words, but I mean, there must be a lot behind.
Well, there was a lot of work to put that together. The Merida Initiative was something that came from the White House together with the Mexican government. They really needed help to address organized crime in Mexico. And on the Mexican side, it meant working with their legislature, their Justice Department, the Attorney General, the court, police, prosecutors, and they also have a federal system like we do with state governments and a federal government. So it meant working with a lot of governors and state attorneys general. So a lot of coordination and integration on the Mexican side. And then on the U.S. side, it meant working with the National Security Council, Homeland Security, our Department of Justice, our Department of State, USAID, and others to integrate our efforts in a way that would help the Mexican government with their law enforcement initiatives.
So I don't know if you could talk about this or want to talk about it, but Trump's declaration that these, I guess, criminal enterprises in Mexico are now terrorist organizations. Do you have any perspectives on that, what that might imply in terms of actions?
Okay, a designation of these groups as terrorist organizations, I'm not sure that gets you a whole lot. It's part of the shock and awe of first week in office. You sign this blizzard of executive orders and determinations and things. What it does, it's sending a signal to Mexico. Been a lot of, the whole thing about building a wall, the deportations, the sanctions, all of this is sending a message to Mexico City that, we perceive you as a problem or an enemy or an issue. Having said that, if you really want to stop, for example, migration on the Texas border, well, most of these migrants are not Mexicans.
Right.
Okay. They're coming from Afghanistan. They're coming from Africa. They're coming, there's a large group coming from China now. In fact, you can fly visa-free from anywhere in the world to Managua, Nicaragua today, and you pay a bribe to Daniel Ortega's government there in Nicaragua. They connect you with the coyotes who will bring you into the United States. It's an integrated service. And so a lot of these folks are they're not Mexican. Statistically, I like to be data-driven, okay?
Right.
If I get sick, I don't go to a witch doctor. I want somebody who's been to med school, okay? I don't want all this pseudo presumption. I want science. I want data. Look at the data of the people coming across the border and the people leaving the United States. There is a net return of Mexicans to Mexico. And that's been going on for 10 years. So, this idea that Mexico is the problem. No, Mexico doesn't want these people coming into Mexico. Okay. So we need to be working hand in glove together in partnership with Mexico to prevent a problem that we have in common. Mexico doesn't want organized crime going on in their jurisdiction. And we don't want it on our border. We need to be collaborative with the Mexican government to eliminate these problems. And there's great people in Mexico, great partners with whom we could work. There's some bad apples, but there's some bad apples in our country. So, I think we need to be looking more for win-win solutions.
Wow. I'm not sure what question to ask next, but this whole project working in Mexico with against the cartels, was that one of the most dangerous assignments you were in, or? Much contact?
Actually, that was pretty cushy because I spent a lot of time at the White House, at the Capitol. I spent a lot of time in nice offices in Mexico around the country on the negotiation of the package and putting it together. So that was actually quite genteel.
So on a lot of these assignments that you're on for different agencies or departments, did you work individually or did you work as part of a team?
With the Merida initiative for Mexico, I was part of an interagency team. So we had, a delegate, an assistant secretary from the State Department. We had a similar person from Homeland Security, a similar person from the Justice Department, and so on. And we worked together as a team. And then we worked very collaboratively with people, legislators on the Hill. This wasn't a Democrat or Republican issue. I think everyone wants to get rid of organized crime.
Yeah.
So, the idea was, how can we work together collaboratively, share information, and get something done? Obviously, the Pentagon was also involved with this, and, DEA and others. So it was a large effort to get all of that coordinated.
And you're working with people who can make decisions and answer questions and take action. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. The Attorney General of Mexico, the President of the Supreme Court of Mexico, people at that level.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the work in Iraq, standing up 16 different departments. Is there evidence that work was done still in Iraq today?
Yeah, there is a democracy and a government in Iraq. That's a success.
Yeah.
At the start of when I first got there, you talked about the opening question, stepping into chaos. I have a better example, but this was really stepping into chaos. The United States military had overthrown this government, and anyone above a certain level in any government department, ministries they're called there, was fired because they were affiliated with the old Ba'ath party. So anyone with any leadership potential or ability was gone. And in its place, the U.S. military put military generals to run all of these different departments. So imagine you're a professional medical doctor or somebody expert in medical procurement or handling medicines or something like that. And now you've got a U.S. military general giving you orders in a language you don't even understand. And it didn't work. And I think the Iraqis, were embarrassed that their country had been invaded. They were embarrassed that we had to remove Saddam Hussein. They didn't do it themselves. And they were embarrassed that we stayed. And that's not a very inspiring workforce for anyone. So after several years, the U.S. military was trying to run this place, and it spectacularly didn't work. So the State Department came in and said, oh, you guys are road amateurs. We'll take over now. You guys step aside. And the State Department came in and they put ambassadors in each of these ministries. But, okay. So, instead of a uniform, they're wearing a tie, but same result. So a few more years go by, it's now 2008, 2009, and nothing's working. The U.S. military had bombed their electricity. They had about 4,000 megawatts before the war. They were down to 2,000 all these years later, and desperate attempts trying to get that stood back up. And people without electricity, they can't work. Unemployed people get angry. And there was all this sort of fueling of discontent against the U.S. occupation force. And so the White House said, okay, Hendrix, your number one job, literally get the lights on. And after my predecessors had not done that, and by the time I left, there was 9,000 megawatts of electricity. That's a success. We got the Ministry of Oil was another priority because years they wanted the oil. That was supposedly the reason we invaded. And if you're cynical, and amongst other things with the Ministry of Oil, we had the largest public procurement in history. My nemesis was the Wall Street Journal. They said, it's never going to happen. It's going to have to be under U.S. law. They're going to have to do it in Washington or Turkey because God forget Iraq. And I told the Iraqi minister, no, the oil's in Iraq. We're going to do this in Baghdad. And we're going to do it under Iraqi law. And we're going to do it live on television and on the internet. so that there's no question. And we're going to open the bids in public. And it led to the privatization of 2 giant oil wells. That day, Iraq learned that it had twice the amount of oil that they thought they had the day before.
Wow.
And they made an obscene amount of money. To those people who think that we invaded Iraq for their oil, I would tell everyone that this program, paid for by U.S. taxpayer money, just the technical assistance, led to the privatization of these 2 giant oil wells that were purchased by a consortium of BP, British Petroleum, with China. So we didn't get any of the oil. So, people got to just give that one up. It's just not true. But we set up personnel system. They had never had competitive hiring in 5,000 years of their country. We set up competitive hiring, evaluation, and promotion. First time, with job descriptions, professionalized personnel offices, first time in Iraqi history. We set up transparent procurement systems. We set up ability projects. All of this across 16 different ministries. So it was for me, it was a magical time to be there, and it shows that this can work. We were undercut, I think, by several things. One was our own government would tolerate a high level of corruption by people that we liked for whatever reason. And that went all the way up to the top on the Iraqi administration. I would have preferred that the law be the law and let the consequences be the consequences. And I have faith in judicial systems, and I think we would have been better off today had we allowed the chips to fall where they fell. And then by not insisting on a credible, legitimate government for the Iraqi people, that allowed subversive elements to reorganize and reconstitute themselves. And that led to ISIS and the whole problems that we've had leading up to a couple of weeks ago in Syria. So it's been an interesting career.
Looking back on many of the changes you made, some of them, well, maybe many of them were cultural differences in how they did business and how they approach the economy, and hiring people for merit, not because they're related to somebody else in somebody else's tribe or something. Are those things still in place? Do you get to go back and check? Do you talk to people and see whether that stuff stuck?
A lot of them are in place, and the reforms we did are there. One of the things I was very proud of was coming up with a basket of medicines that would be constantly stocked and available, so that because if you go to the Wapaka hospital on an emergency, they know, look, whatever you're walking in the door with, you're going to need one of these 100 medicines, or 60 or 40 or 20. 99% chance it's going to be one of these. So let's just make sure those are stocked and priced and available nationwide. And, simple things like that we were able to do. And Iraq has made tremendous strides. I don't think politically they're where some politicians in Washington want them to be. They're very cozy with Iran, but they're neighbors with Iran. They have to be. This whole idea of Sunni, Shia, forget it. The families are intermarried. They travel to each other's countries. I saw one location where the White House decided we would put in a generator at a electric plant if the Iraqis built the plant. And so Iraqis said, sure. So they were building this plant. We brought in this huge General Electric generator. It's massive size. And we're installing it. And so I went out to see this. It was out by the holy city of Najaf. And I met the crew there. And of course, I have all U.S. military as my security detail. And, I met the guys, and I walked over to the security detail. I said, hey, Colonel, you want to get your picture with these guys? There's the engineer that led the construction. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I said, well, before we walk over, just so you know, the Iraqis subcontracted this to an Iranian company. So all of the people over there is Iranian, and his eyes got really big. And I said, well, come on over, we'll get your picture. And he's like, you know, I went over, I got my picture taken with the group. And the next day I get an email from the colonel, hey, can you email me a copy of that picture? Okay, you know, sure, here you go. You know, so look, people are people, and, you know, we just have to understand families are put together in all kinds of ways, and they live in a difficult neighborhood. So we got to let them be themselves.
Okay, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Curiouser with our guest Steve Hendrix, former senior diplomat in the Biden, Trump, and Obama administrations. Guys?
So would you, just one question on the stuff in Iraq, of everything that you accomplished there, would you consider that one of the most successful engagements that you were part of?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I think, you know, each country is a little bit different, and the scale is very different. Sometimes it's a lot, you know, I had a lot of money that I was working with in Iraq. Sometimes it's a lot harder to work in a place where you have no money at all, and yet you're trying to change reality. In Paraguay, they had a guerrilla movement that was robbing banks, kidnapping people. They were, you know, called themselves Marxists, but I think they're just criminals. But they would kidnap people, killed some people, and they were creating mayhem in the country. And so we needed to get rid of that, but there's no money for that, right? So we started a program that was absolutely not military at all. We worked with mayors and defined what we needed to do. We worked with local governors and the presidency and came up with what was called the Northern Zone Initiative. And we created so many jobs that were market-driven, working with the private sector, that the guerrillas couldn't recruit anymore. You know, so nobody wanted to be a guerrilla. They all wanted to come work for us.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just sucked the oxygen out of it. There was an evaluation of the program that went all the way up to the top of the State Department. And they came back and they said, this is the textbook best example ever of a program that eliminated an insurgency. And there was no bullets, no rifles, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different levels, different impacts, different story. Yeah.
So I'm just itching to ask this question again, answer if you want to, but, and I'm going to just very broad strokes, probably not completely accurate, but we think about all of the blood and money and time and effort spent in Afghanistan, right? So, and that just kind of went where it went. And now we see human rights again, women being taken away, et cetera. Is it just not possible? I mean, is it just a mistake for us to look at another country's culture and say they should be treating people that particular way, and we need to go and try to modify and change how they live? Is that just not doable? Do we need to give that up and just recognize that in certain cultures they're going to do things that we find abhorrent and just leave it? Or what do we do with these things?
That's a very good question. I think, you know, there's a lot of cynicism about so-called nation building and the expense of that. To have a military serviceman in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, any of these places, cost the U.S. taxpayer over $1 million a year per person. When I was in Iraq, I was joking with the Deputy Commander General, 4-star General. I said, you know, I can save you $100 million a year. I said, I'll go over and touch 100 soldiers on the shoulder, and you send them home, and their families will be happy, you know, and it'll save the taxpayer $100 million. And he laughed, you know. I mean, this stuff is famously expensive. And if you look at our national budget, it's largely taken up with things that are entitlement spending. One is interest on the debt. Another is Medicare, Medicaid, social welfare programming. And the slice of the budget that is used for so-called discretionary spending is quite small. The majority of that is taken up with military spending. So there's really almost nothing left for education, healthcare, and the rest of it in the national budget. When you go in with a U.S. military solution, that is the most expensive option. And the U.S. military can do maybe one war, maybe two wars at a time, and then it's spent. It's going to take another 10 years to bring it back. And people don't realize the budget for the military is just to have a military. It's not to actually use it. So when you actually want to use the military, you have to go back to Congress and get a supplemental for even more money. So, this money is needed. So in a country like Paraguay, where there is an insurgency, look, the U.S. military ain't coming. They're not going to be there. In fact, we're not going to invade Haiti. We're not going to invade Nicaragua. We're not going to invade Venezuela. We're not going to invade Colombia or anywhere else. So how do you do that? Less than 0.5% of the budget is foreign assistance. And, that was my field. And I think, for every one Afghanistan, there were 50 places around the world that, could blow up.
Sure.
And we had our finger in the dike, praying that it wasn't going to be our country. Yeah. And we would use that $1.75 that we got to try to do something, make something of nothing. And a lot of times it works. So, I'm a big fan of prevention is much better than the cure.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if Steve, if you could speak to anything. Do you have any experience with the Underground Railway to save Afghans after the American forces left? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I do, very minimally. My wife led an effort through St. Mark's Episcopal Church, Wapaka, to come up with funding for relocation of some Afghans. So that's something being done at the local level. There was a bipartisan disaster with this. You had President Trump, who negotiated not with the Afghan government, but directly with the Taliban, the day, manner, and place of our withdrawal. And then he left office. And because this was already an agreed deal, Biden inherited it. He implements the plan. It was a disaster. And then, of course, the Trump administration, look, these guys really messed it up. Yeah, okay. Okay. Maybe Biden should have rethought it. But if you kicked it out the date, the Afghans are saying, no, you had a promise, you were going to leave on this date. We're going to restart killing Americans and all of this. So, yeah, it was the management and control of this was done by Washington. And that's almost always a mistake, to not empower your people in the field to lead programs and do what they can. That was a huge mistake in Vietnam. And it was a huge mistake in Afghanistan. Also, you can't impose something on a country that doesn't want it. The Russians tried to invade, the British tried to invade. It just was never going to work. And we were there under false pretenses. The people that attacked the Twin Towers they had refuge in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden. But
that origin.
Okay, once you eliminated that group, we didn't need to be there. And so there was a lot of mistakes that were made at that time. In terms of the refugees coming out, my heart goes out to those people. They're very committed. They're very intelligent. There's a program by the American Bar Association led by my friend Mike Biowitz, to help Afghan judges, mainly women, to get recertified in the United States so that they can have legal careers here. So there's a lot of programs underway. The State Department probably could have, should have processed the visas and things much more quickly than they have. There were a lot of breakdowns in that. And there's an Inspector General's report out that goes through all that. And much more needs to be done. The situation for women right now in Afghanistan is deplorable.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
Do you have an itching question, Bob?
Well, I was just going to say, with your current international consultancy, would we expect to see you talking to Greenland and Panama about their canal?
Actually, this week my phone's been ringing off the hook with embassies in Washington. How are we supposed to understand this? What's going on? The whole thing about Greenland and Panama, it's unbecoming in international diplomacy to threaten to take over other countries' land. You know, I mean, it just doesn't go over very well. You know,
That's very, very politely said. Unbecoming.
To a domestic audience, but the president is not on the campaign trail anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
It's telegraphed around the world, and it's on Al Jazeera, it's on France 24, it's on German television, you know, and there's consequences for these kinds of statements.
Yeah. I'm going to go back. I just want to ask, so you were involved in strategy to counter China. What do you think the average person needs to kind of understand about China as a threat, or not as much of a threat? What's your message there?
I think we fundamentally misunderstand a lot of what's going on in China. You know, vehicles, electric vehicles. The best made electric vehicles in the world today are from China.
Right.
And they're half the price of the vehicles, electric vehicles that you can buy in this country. And the only reason they're not imported here is because of the tariffs and the sanctions and all the rest of it. But the rest of the world is buying this stuff. And by not...
They're also importing a heck of a lot of, I mean, these cars are so full of information technology that I'm not sure you want all that driving around your road.
So anyway. Let's shift over to the TikTok issue.
Yeah.
One of the reasons to ban TikTok on national security grounds is that if you're a business like TikTok, like X, that operate in China, part of the deal is if the Chinese government asks for your collaboration, you have to turn over what you got. Okay? So having said that, if the Chinese wanted this data, they could more cheaply, more aptly buy it today from X, from Facebook, and from Meta, the same data. So the real issue, it seems to me, is data privacy. But we're applying, you know, the solution is a screwdriver and we're taking a hammer. Okay? If we're really concerned about national security, we would come up with data privacy constraints as we have in Europe. By not doing that, we allow the Europeans to set the standard and not us. We cede our nationality, our sovereignty to the European Union. That wasn't the smartest of ideas. And then why is TikTok back? Well, it's better than Facebook. I use TikTok, you know, I mean, it's better than X. It's better than Instagram. You know, it's just fun. Do I feel threatened? Well, you know, I know that Facebook can sell my data. I know that X sells my data and Instagram and all the rest. So, you know, putting up sanctions, you know, a lot of this tends to get to racism against Chinese, you know. In World War II, we had these crazy things against Japanese American citizens. You know, we have to be very careful what we're doing here. Also, part of what makes America great is our innovation and research. And that is predicated on collaboration and attracting the absolute world best talent. Cutting off China and other countries breaks that stream. It's going to hurt us in the long run. It's going to hurt our own competitiveness. Instead of shutting down our access to the world and to information and to the best and the brightest, instead of cutting all that off, we should be welcoming. We should be welcoming collaboration with Chinese scientists and others, everyone around the world, to make the University of Wisconsin the best in the world.
I can see you're going to be arrested by the...
Look, I've served Democrats and Republicans, and, you know, this isn't a partisan thing. I think all
of course.
Jobs, climate change is real. Nuclear proliferation is real. The next pandemic is right around the corner. That's not an American, it's not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an American issue. It's a global issue.
It's a world issue, yeah.
And if we can figure out how to address pandemics better, if we can figure out how to limit climate change to within 1.5 degrees Celsius, you know, we're all going to be better off for that.
Yeah. Should we, we're getting kind of close to the end here.
I don't know where we are in time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Yeah. It's time for the curiouser question of the day, huh? Go ahead, Chuck.
All right. The question was, when was a time that you found yourself in the midst of chaos and how did you respond? This is one of those questions I wrote without having any idea how to answer, so I'm going to go last. Steve will go last from We'll go Mark first.
I got nothing. I can't think of any time where I was, in a job situation or whatever, where it was chaos. No, I just.
Didn't you work at King?
Well, yeah, that I guess the pandemic was a little bit of a chaos there. Yeah. And yeah, PPE was a real problem, but luckily we did get out ahead of it and didn't wait around for the federal government. We started.
That was part of your department, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We got out and we started buying stuff because we knew it was going to get bad, and so we started buying ahead and getting stocked
Good
up.
for you guys.
Yeah, we're pretty proud of that.
Bob.
I did a lot of meeting facilitation as a consultant, and so sometimes we'd have 5 different groups going at the same time, but just one consultant checking in on everybody. So every once in a while, I'd find one of the 5 teams. I'd walk into the room, and there was a chaotic situation. Generally, I would just sit at the table, so I'm like one of the members of the team, so I could listen to what's going on. And then eventually, I would stand up. So now there's authority presence in the room, and if that didn't get enough attention, I would walk up to the flip chart. And I would pick up a pen, and when somebody said something, I would write it down. The whole room would get quiet because they know, like, once it gets written on a flip chart, it's going to be part of the plan. So now we need to think very carefully about what we're talking about. And then the other thing I would do is I would find the person who was the biggest instigator in the room, and in order to bring organization, I would make him what we used to call the air traffic controller. So you can't have all the planes trying to land at O'Hare at one time. You have to say, you go first, you go second, you go third. So if you had a comment, you had to raise your hand, and the guy who was always dominating the conversation, he kept a list of who speaks next. He was allowed to enter his name, but he had to go on the bottom of the list. So it was just little hints like that eventually they kind of would come around, and then I'd leave them alone and go to the next room. So.
The only example I can come up with after those 2 great ones, and Steve's going to just blow us away, is Family Christmas with the Reynolds.
Oh my God.
Ask my wife about it. I'm kind of a black sheep, truly an introvert, and my family's Christmas is traditionally not so much anymore, but we're just chaos. Kids, grandkids, music on the stereo, somebody playing a piano, blah, blah, blah. How did I respond? Stuff my face with food.
There you go.
Steve?
It works.
Just so Steve understands, we interviewed Marcy Reynolds, Chuck's sister. We were talking about the Reynolds family when they get together for holidays, what a slam bang affair that becomes. And she said, and the non-Reynolds members who are married to the family, they all kind of gather on the other side of the room, kind of cowering in fear.
Yeah, I was
not sure what's going to happen.
All right,
yeah,
Steve.
I guess that'd be a chaotic situation.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, most of my career I've been dealing with sort of these nuclear, big national security issues, but there's nothing more important in the diplomatic sphere than hosting the 4th of July party, okay, where you invite all these people. I was in this country, and there was a left-wing government, and the legislature decided to impeach the president. And they did kind of this fast impeachment with no ability to do, they just like.
Let's get rid of Joe.
So the left is saying, well, this was a coup because they didn't really follow procedure. And the right's like, no, it was an impeachment. And the United States, the White House, didn't know what to think. And the Europeans didn't know what to do. And everyone was paralyzed. But we had to have our 4th of July party. Traditionally, you invite the president to come and give some remarks at your 4th of July party, the host country president. And our ambassador didn't know which president to invite, the old guy or the new guy. And so I said, well, you invite everyone. It's our party. It's not about them. It's about us. You just invite everyone. And he's like, well, then which president gets to speak? I said, no. We set the agenda. It's our party. You speak. You're the ambassador. You don't have them speak. So we invited the whole cabinet from the old team and the whole cabinet from the new president. They both confirmed, and our security was watching to see who was coming and when they were coming. And part of the logistics on our side, if you're hosting a party with 2 families that don't like each other, is, who's going to receive who, right? So I said, well, look, I will deal with all of the leftists from an ambassador, you deal with the whole news side or your political section. So that's what we did. I greeted all the cabinet members from the out group. So the members of the cabinets came first, right? And then the two presidents, they were both like coming. Our security knew where they were, and they would stop and get updates from each other. And, you know, and eventually the new president arrived. So the old president's like, well, look, if the new guy's there, then I'm not going. Okay. And he texted all of his ministers to immediately leave. And I'm there at this party. I want the party to be successful. You know, we got hot dogs, we got a live band, you know.
Hot dogs.
And all of these guys are like, hey, Steve, look, I just got a text from the president. I got to go. And I said, look, I don't want to get into politics here. It's 4th of July, but let's assume for the sake of argument that this change in government really happens. And then you're now out of a job. This party is the best networking place you're going to find for your next job. And, you know, they all laughed and, you know, a number of them left. A couple of them stayed, and one of them got a job as a minister in the new government.
There you go.
He got a promotion, actually. He went from economics minister to planning minister. So
very good.
Funny.
Excellent.
But that was chaos, organizing a party for the 4th of July during a coup.
Yeah, you don't want those hot dogs to go to waste.
No.
Reminds me of one of the episodes of the show Diplomat. Yeah.
Well, Steve, it's been fascinating listening to you here, and we're really glad that you were on the show for us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we should have done it for 3 hours, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe next time. All right, that's going to do it for us for this week. Thanks again to Steve Hendrix, former senior diplomat in the Biden, Trump, and Obama administrations. And thanks for joining us here on Curious Sir from 96.3 WILW and 99.1 WAUP.